Every system across the galaxy went silent at almost the same time. Not literally silent, but everything that was supposed to see, hear, or detect anything suddenly stopped working properly. Starship sensors, planetary scanners, even communication networks started giving impossible readings. Charts twisted into shapes that made no sense. Alarms rang across command bridges, yet no one could tell what was happening or why. The problem wasn't minor. It was massive, and it was everywhere. At first, the technicians thought it was a glitch, perhaps a power surge, a cosmic storm, or a software error. But soon every theory collapsed under the sheer scale of the disruption. Fleets orbiting distant stars couldn't detect each other. Mining stations on moons reported equipment failures they had never seen before. Satellites that had been perfectly reliable for centuries went blind. "This doesn't make sense," said one engineer aboard a research vessel. He rubbed his eyes and stared at the displays. "All our instruments are functioning normally, yet the readings, they're impossible." Another voice from a station orbiting a gas giant added, "It's coming from somewhere. But I don't understand where. It's like a signal, but it isn't, and it's alive in a way." The word alive made everyone pause. Signals aren't alive. Signals are just waves, data moving through space. They obey physics. They cannot think, feel, or choose. Yet the reading suggested something beyond understanding, something that behaved as if it had its own mind. The first idea that came to some was horrifying. Could this be a weapon? Had someone or something developed a tool that could disrupt an entire galactic network? Military fleets began raising shields and preparing for an attack. Every general, captain, and commander assumed the worst. But as they studied the data, something stranger appeared. The signal, the thing causing the chaos, wasn't random or destructive. It carried patterns, sequences that resembled thought processes. And when they tried to interpret the patterns using every known algorithm, the results were human. That word spread through every command channel like fire. Every officer, scientist, and AI began repeating it, almost in disbelief. Humanity? But humanity had disappeared from the galaxy centuries ago. No one had seen a human ship for hundreds of years. No one had heard from Earth since the quarantine, after the collapse of the old Earth colonies. Humanity was assumed extinct, and yet the signal behaved like a human mind. Some scientists speculated quietly that it might be a remnant of long-lost technology, an echo of human thought preserved in some ancient orbital system. Perhaps a forgotten satellite or an AI designed by humans had finally activated. But even that theory didn't fit. The signal was massive. It spanned light years. It moved, it adapted, it responded to observation. "What if it's them?" asked a junior analyst on a communication outpost. "What if humans never really went extinct?" The room went silent. No one wanted to say it out loud. It sounded impossible. And yet the more they analyzed, the more the data confirmed it. The energy signature of the signal matched what would have been expected from human bioelectric activity. Not from machines. Not from stars, not from any known natural phenomenon. The fleets closest to the Sol system, the star system that had once been home to Earth, were the first to report it. They had sensors capable of seeing across vast distances, yet even they struggled to make sense of what they were detecting. "It's coming from Earth," said the captain of a survey ship, his voice barely audible over the chaos of alarms. "Every system we have points to the planet. But how is that possible? The planet is supposed to be empty." The news spread through the galaxy like a storm. Military councils convened. Scientists debated. Some refused to believe it, calling it impossible, even dangerous to investigate. Others insisted that Earth had become a kind of super weapon, lying in wait for centuries, perhaps now awake and aware. Meanwhile, back in orbit around distant planets, engineers were working around the clock to isolate the source. Screens flickered, instruments failed, and even AI assistants began malfunctioning in strange ways. Some reported hearing whispers, as if the machines were speaking in a language they couldn't recognize. And when anyone tried to trace these whispers, they led back to the same mysterious frequency. One scientist described the sensation like this: "It was as if the signal knew they were watching. It responded to their thoughts, almost teasing them." The more they tried to analyze it, the more the readings changed. Patterns would shift, data points would vanish, charts would twist into shapes that seemed deliberate, almost playful. "They're aware," she whispered to herself, her voice trembling. "They know we're here." The idea was terrifying. Humanity was supposed to be gone. Yet here they were, or something that had come from them. Something that could manipulate every sensor, every machine, every system in ways no one had imagined. Across the galaxy, fleets began to prepare for the impossible. They studied tactics for containment, for evacuation, for defense against a force that didn't have a ship, didn't have a body, yet could reach every machine, every sensor, every network. And while some feared it, others were fascinated. If humans had somehow survived, evolved, or transcended their physical forms, it would rewrite every piece of knowledge in the galaxy. For days, the signal pulsed without pause. Every attempt to communicate ended in confusion. Machines froze or misbehaved. Navigation systems reported false positions. Communication channels carried voices that weren't there. And through it all, one pattern became clear. It was coming from Earth, and it was reaching further than anyone expected. Eventually, a council was formed. Representatives from hundreds of worlds debated the next step. Should they approach? Should they prepare for attack? Or should they simply observe, trying to understand what was happening before acting? Many argued for caution. Humanity might be powerful, even dangerous, but it wasn't hostile. At least, nothing suggested hostility yet. Others feared the unknown. "We cannot wait," said a fleet commander. "We must prepare. If they are awake, if they are capable of this, they could destroy us all before we even know what's happening." Yet even the commanders, the most experienced tacticians in the galaxy, could not ignore one truth: the signal was intelligent. And it was curious. It seemed to watch, to adapt, to understand. It wasn't random. It wasn't reckless. It was precise, deliberate, and utterly human in a way no one had expected. Across distant command centers, across warships and research stations, a single question was repeated in whispers. In stunned disbelief, what have we been missing all this time? Humanity had vanished, or so everyone believed. But this signal suggested that disappearance had not been an end. It had been a pause. And now, for reasons no one could yet understand, they had returned. Not in ships, not in armies, not in bodies, but as something far more powerful. Something that could reach across the stars without moving. Something that could make every sensor, every instrument, and every machine in the galaxy bend to its presence. As the first reports from the fleet orbiting Sol came in, everyone realized the truth. The galaxy had assumed it was alone. It had assumed the species that once shaped the stars was gone. But in one pulse, one impossible frequency, humanity had announced it was awake, and the galaxy had no idea what that really meant. After the first shock of the signal, the galaxy fell into a tense silence. Every fleet station and research facility tried to process what had just happened. Communications were still sporadic. Sensors were still unreliable. And everywhere, a single thought haunted everyone. This signal wasn't just energy. It was intelligence. For the first time in centuries, humans, or whatever remained of them, were the unknown in the universe. Scientists and military leaders struggled to describe it. It wasn't a wave, it wasn't matter, and it wasn't an AI. It carried something they had never encountered before: thought. And the thought felt human. The first attempts to analyze it came from the oldest observatories in the galaxy. Massive data arrays, which had been tracking stars and planets for centuries, were redirected toward Earth. Machines hummed, screens flickered, and stacks of data scrolled faster than anyone could read. Every attempt to understand the frequency failed at first. It didn't respond to standard analysis. It didn't behave like any energy signature recorded before. Then something changed. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the signal began to adapt to those who were studying it. Machines started showing patterns, repeating sequences that mimicked human reasoning. It was as if the signal knew that someone was observing it and wanted to be understood, but only partially. The more they studied, the more the signal shifted. "This isn't random," one scientist whispered to a colleague. "It's aware. It's communicating, but not in words we understand." Attempts to send messages back were equally strange. Every signal transmitted toward Earth returned altered. Sometimes it was delayed by hours, other times by days, and the content had changed. Codes that had been sent intact came back rearranged, like puzzles with missing pieces. Every message carried echoes of thought. Sometimes it seemed curious, other times playful, almost as if it were teasing those who dared to probe it. Meanwhile, fleets around the galaxy were on edge. Some military leaders called for an immediate strike on the solar system, fearing an unknown human superweapon. Others argued for restraint, pointing out that nothing about the signal had suggested hostility. It was neither destructive nor aggressive. It simply existed, powerful and incomprehensible. The tension was unbearable. In meeting rooms, discussions grew heated. "We can't let them reach this far," said one commander, pounding a table. "We don't know what they're capable of. If they can disrupt our sensors, what else can they do?" A scientist shook her head. "We assume hostility because we fear the unknown. But this is different. It's not trying to harm us. It's showing itself, trying to make contact in the only way it knows how." And then came the breakthrough. A team of analysts noticed a pattern within the chaos of the signal. Embedded in the frequency were shapes like threads weaving through the noise. When interpreted, these shapes resembled human thought patterns, the kind recorded in ancient neural studies long before humanity had vanished. It was subtle but unmistakable. Someone or something was thinking, learning, and observing just as a human mind would. For the first time, some began to hope. Perhaps this was not a weapon, not a threat, but a message. Perhaps humanity had survived in a form the galaxy could not yet understand. The idea spread slowly, cautiously among scientists and officers alike. If humans had evolved beyond physical bodies, perhaps their consciousness had merged with the energy of the planet itself. Perhaps Earth had become a living archive, a repository of thought, waiting for the galaxy to notice. Efforts to communicate continued. Fleets stationed around the system attempted to transmit signals in every frequency, in every language, in every code ever used by humans. Some signals returned altered as before. Others did not return at all. And still, through every attempt, the strange intelligence responded. It did not speak, but it moved, rearranging energy patterns, bending light, and creating anomalies in space that resembled thought itself. The fleets that had initially feared humanity began to hesitate. Their weapons, once ready for attack, now felt useless. How could they fight something that did not exist in the way they understood existence? The very idea of a human had changed. Humanity was no longer just flesh and blood. Humanity had become something else entirely, a force of thought, intelligence, and energy intertwined. As the days passed, anomalies near Earth grew more pronounced. Satellites orbiting the planet began to align in unusual ways. Energy fields flickered with color and movement, patterns that seemed deliberate. Machines, even those belonging to other species, began to behave erratically. Some refused commands, others repeated strange sequences as if learning from the environment around them. It was becoming clear that the signal was not limited to the planet. It could reach across machines, across networks, across the stars. The first encounter was subtle but undeniable. A drone sent to map the planet's surface suddenly transmitted images that made no sense. Mountains shifted positions. Rivers bent in impossible ways. Cities that had been in ruins suddenly appeared whole, glowing faintly with light that did not come from any known source. And in every frame, a sense of awareness lingered, as if the world itself were watching the drone. "It's alive," whispered an engineer. "The planet. It's alive, and it knows we're here." The revelation sent shockwaves through the fleet. A living planet? No, not the planet itself, but something within it. Something human. The idea seemed impossible. And yet every sensor, every reading, every observation pointed to the same conclusion. Humanity had survived. Not as humans in the flesh, but as a consciousness interwoven with the planet and the surrounding energy fields. Galactic scholars, who had once dismissed old legends of humanity as myths, now scrambled to understand. Textbooks were rewritten in days. Ancient archives were dug up. Dusty manuscripts translated and theories tested at unprecedented speeds. Every civilization that had ever interacted with humanity was suddenly forced to reconsider everything they had believed. Meanwhile, the signal continued to evolve. It learned. It adapted. Attempts to trick it failed. Attempts to probe it with technology alone failed. The only consistent factor was that it seemed interested, curious, observant. It did not attack. It did not flee. It simply existed, waiting for recognition. Some began to speculate quietly about its purpose. Perhaps it was a message, a warning, or a demonstration. Perhaps humanity had transcended its physical limitations, choosing a form that could survive across time and space. And perhaps this signal, the first tangible sign of their return, was the galaxy's invitation to understand what they had become. Fleets and stations across the galaxy began preparing in new ways. Weapons were moved to lower readiness. Communication channels were opened for observation rather than attack. Scientists developed new instruments designed not to destroy but to listen. Everyone understood that this was no ordinary encounter. It was not a battle. It was not diplomacy. It was the beginning of understanding something entirely new. And so, for the first time in centuries, the galaxy waited. It waited for humanity to reveal itself, not in ships or armies, but in the form of a signal, alive and aware. Every fleet, every station, every observer watched the pulse from Earth, wondering what it meant. And as the signal continued to hum across space, carrying the unmistakable essence of human thought, one fact became clear. Whatever humanity had become, it had changed everything. The galaxy was no longer the same, and no one knew what would happen next. As the signal continued to pulse across space, the fleets nearest to the Sol system felt a mix of awe and fear. Every instrument designed to monitor the stars, every array built to scan planets and detect threats, seemed to falter when facing the energy coming from Earth. It wasn't just that the readings were strange. They were alive. They responded to the observers, adapting to every attempt to measure them. It was no longer science as anyone had known it. The first ships to reach the outer edges of the solar system reported unusual phenomena. Satellites and probes sent toward the planet were affected almost immediately. Communications loops echoed strange distortions like static with intention. Navigation systems went temporarily offline. Even the simplest instructions to robotic drones were altered mid-execution, leaving them hovering aimlessly before completing any task. And everywhere, in subtle ways, the drones seemed to pause as if considering their next move. The scientists aboard the flagship stared at their instruments in disbelief. "They're watching us," said one quietly. "It's not random. It's aware of what we're doing." For centuries, humanity had been considered lost. Legends spoke of their ingenuity, their resilience, their ability to survive against impossible odds. But these were stories from the past, tales preserved in records and relics. No one expected those stories to become real again, and yet here it was. Evidence that humans had not only survived, but had evolved into something far beyond physical existence. The first attempt to understand the signal involved sending encoded messages toward Earth. Researchers transmitted patterns of light, sound, and energy, hoping the signal would respond in kind. Some messages returned altered, reshaped in ways that made no logical sense but carried unmistakable signs of intelligence. Others didn't return at all, vanishing into the pulse, leaving observers to wonder whether the signal had simply ignored them or absorbed the message. One observer finally broke the silence. "It's not just communication," they said. "It's teaching us. Every time we try to understand it, it changes the way we perceive the universe. It's showing us new possibilities." Every day the phenomena grew more extraordinary. Energy fields around the planet shimmered like liquid metal, shifting colors in patterns that resembled neural activity. Satellites in orbit showed glimpses of landscapes that no human being had seen before. Ruins of ancient cities suddenly appeared complete in high-resolution scans, glowing faintly as if alive. It was clear that the pulse emanating from Earth was not simply a signal. It was a living presence interacting with its environment. Galactic fleets prepared cautiously. Military leaders wanted to launch strikes fearing the unknown. Scientists begged for patience, arguing that this was not an attack but an opportunity. Ships moved in careful formation around the system, maintaining observation rather than aggression, and slowly, even the most skeptical officers began to sense something remarkable. Humanity had not only survived, they had transcended. Communication attempts evolved. Teams used sophisticated algorithms to translate the signal into patterns the human mind could recognize. Slowly, fragments of meaning emerged. They were not words in the traditional sense. They were sequences of thought, emotions, intentions, pieces of consciousness embedded in waves of energy. Observers could feel curiosity, caution, and even a faint sense of humor woven into the pulses. It was as if humanity had preserved not just their knowledge but their very essence, and it was reaching out for recognition. The first physical probe sent to Earth encountered phenomena that defied understanding. As it descended through the planet's atmosphere, instruments recorded energy patterns twisting around the craft, almost like invisible hands guiding it. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't dangerous. It simply altered its path as if nudging the probe to explore in ways the operators had not intended. Cameras captured landscapes reshaping themselves, rivers flowing in impossible directions, forests expanding and retracting in moments. Cities long destroyed glimmered in the distance as though memory itself had taken shape. "This is incredible," said one scientist, tears in their eyes. "It's not just life. It's memory. It's thought. Humanity has preserved itself in the very world it came from." Observers on distant planets realized that the signal's reach was not limited to Earth alone. Energy waves transmitted through space were affecting machines, computers, and networks throughout the galaxy. Instruments that had once operated autonomously began behaving strangely, repeating patterns, rearranging code, and even generating sequences that resembled human thought. The galaxy had never experienced anything like it. Humanity in this form was no longer confined to a single planet. It had become a force that interacted with everything around it. Fleets that had initially prepared for conflict now hesitated. Weapons felt inadequate, unnecessary even. How could they fight something that did not exist in a traditional sense? This was not an army, not a ship, not even a machine. They were confronting the consciousness of a species that had reshaped itself into something beyond the physical. Scholars and engineers worked around the clock to decode the patterns further. Slowly, they began to understand fragments of meaning embedded within the pulses. Some signals suggested curiosity, asking questions about the universe, about other civilizations, about the observers themselves. Others carried memories, vivid recreations of experiences from long before humanity's disappearance. Entire histories seemed preserved in the pulses, flowing like light through space. "It's like they're telling a story," one researcher said, "a story of who they were, who they are now, and what they have become. And they want us to understand it." As more probes reached the planet, subtle changes in the environment became impossible to ignore. Forests shimmered as though reflecting unseen energy. Rivers bent in ways that suggested awareness. Cities long thought to be in ruins glowed faintly, reconstructing themselves in moments and then fading again. It became clear that the signal was not confined to a single point. It was integrated with the planet itself. Earth was alive, but not in the traditional sense. Humanity had become a part of it, existing as thought and energy interwoven with the world. Observers began to wonder how this had happened. How could a species preserve its consciousness across centuries without physical form? Some hypothesized that it was an ancient technology, a project designed to survive extinction. Others believed it was evolution itself, a natural transformation that allowed humanity to exist beyond bodies. Whatever the truth, the evidence was undeniable. Humanity had transcended. Military leaders struggled with fear and awe. They had spent centuries preparing for threats, building fleets and weapons capable of destroying entire worlds. And yet now their preparations seemed meaningless. They faced a force that could not be targeted, could not be destroyed in conventional ways. Humanity had become something entirely different, something beyond comprehension, and the galaxy was witnessing the first signs of it awakening. Meanwhile, scientists continued to interpret the patterns of thought. They discovered that the pulses carried not only knowledge but also emotion. Curiosity, caution, humor, and even hope were embedded within the signals. It was clear that humanity had not lost its essence. It had preserved it in a new form, one that could communicate across light years and interact with the galaxy in ways no one had imagined. As the first observers began to grasp the magnitude of what was happening, a realization settled over them like a wave. Humanity had not returned to conquer. It had returned to exist, to communicate, and perhaps to teach. The galaxy had assumed they were gone, assumed that the stories of their ingenuity and resilience were just myths, but the signal proved otherwise. Humanity was awake, humanity had transcended, and the universe would never be the same again. For the fleet stationed around Earth, for the scientists decoding the pulses, and for every civilization that had ever encountered humanity, one question remained: what would come next? The answer was unknown, but one thing was certain. The pulse from Earth, alive and aware, was only the beginning. Humanity had returned in a way no one could have predicted. The galaxy was watching, listening, and learning. And in that moment, everyone understood that they were no longer observing a species. They were witnessing the evolution of consciousness itself. By the time the first exploration teams reached the edge of Earth's atmosphere, The entire galaxy had shifted in its perception of humanity. No longer were humans a species lost to history. No longer were they merely a memory preserved in dusty archives. They had become something entirely different, a presence that seemed to exist beyond flesh and bone, woven into the very energy of the planet itself. The ships that approached Earth were unlike any that had been built before. Scientists and engineers had designed them to withstand anomalies, fluctuations in gravity, and the strange distortions caused by the signal. Every sensor on board was tuned to detect not just energy and matter, but patterns, thought, and intent. The crews were nervous, aware that they were stepping into an environment that might defy every law of physics they had known. As they entered orbit, Earth revealed its transformations. From space, the planet looked familiar at first. Continents, oceans, clouds, but on closer observation something was off. Cities long in ruins glowed faintly at night, like memory made visible. Forests shifted subtly, almost as if they were breathing. Rivers reflected not just sunlight, but colors that did not exist in any known spectrum. And in every place, energy patterns pulsed rhythmically, synchronized across the entire globe. The first probe sent down to the surface recorded astonishing phenomena. Mountains shimmered with faint light along their ridges. Valleys appeared to fold and reshape themselves. Technology that had long lain dormant in the ruins of cities activated for brief moments, displaying sequences that resembled writing. But it wasn't any known language. Instead, it was thought encoded into light and movement, a pattern that seemed to communicate without words. Observers began to understand that they were not just witnessing a planet. They were witnessing humanity itself, preserved, alive, and aware. It had become a part of Earth in a way that no one could have predicted. Human consciousness, intelligence, and memory were no longer confined to bodies or structures. They had become woven into the very energy of the planet, interacting with everything around them. As the fleets watched, small anomalies began to appear near the ships. Drones sent to survey the planet were guided in subtle ways, their paths altered by invisible forces. Instruments flickered, recalibrated themselves, and then displayed information the crews could barely comprehend. One moment a probe would show a forest. The next moment the same area would display a city long thought destroyed. Each time the patterns were precise, deliberate, and undeniably human in their logic. Scientists aboard the lead ship speculated that this was not merely energy or a signal. Humanity had somehow transformed itself into a new form of existence, one that could manipulate matter, energy, and perception across scales that were previously unimaginable. It was as if the planet itself had become a living archive, a repository for all human knowledge, thought, and memory. For the first time, observers began to feel as though they were being watched. Not in the usual sense of surveillance, but in a way that felt personal. Instruments began to pick up sequences of thought that mirrored the observations of the crews. Every action, every decision, every attempt to measure or interact with the environment seemed to be noted and reflected back. Humanity, it seemed, was not passive. It was aware, curious, and intent on understanding those who had come to witness it. The first human interaction, or as close as anyone could call it, occurred when a drone landed near what had once been a major city. The buildings were in ruins, yet faint light traced the outlines of structures as if memory itself had been made visible. The drone's cameras picked up subtle shifts in the light, sequences that resembled gestures. At first, scientists thought it was an optical illusion. Then they realized that the patterns were responding directly to the drone's movements, adjusting and reshaping in real time. "It's alive," said one researcher quietly. "Not in the way we understand life, but it is aware. It is human, and it knows we are here." As probes explored further, the planet continued to reveal its secrets. Forests glimmered with energy that moved like thought. Rivers flowed in patterns that seemed intentional, as though guiding travelers to specific locations. Even the ruins of ancient cities displayed fleeting moments of reconstruction, walls and towers appearing briefly, then fading as if remembering the past. Every display, every pattern, every pulse seemed to carry fragments of consciousness, an echo of humanity preserved in a new form. The fleets in orbit struggled to comprehend what they were witnessing. Weapons felt meaningless. Orders seemed irrelevant. Humanity had transcended its former limitations, and the galaxy could only observe, marvel, and learn. Military leaders who had once prepared for confrontation now debated whether to continue aggressive operations at all. Scientists argued that this was an opportunity to understand something far beyond their current knowledge, an evolution of intelligence unlike anything they had seen. Gradually, observers began to recognize patterns in the planet's responses. The pulses of energy seemed to guide exploration, drawing attention to specific areas. The ruins of cities, the remnants of technology, and even the natural landscapes all appeared to be organized with intent. It was as if humanity, preserved in energy and thought, was teaching them how to see the planet, how to understand it, and perhaps even how to communicate. Some teams noticed that the pulses contained what appeared to be fragments of memory, images of past events, stories of survival, moments of discovery and invention, all encoded into the energy that flowed through the planet. In a way, the planet had become a living museum, not just of human history, but of human consciousness itself. Every memory was active, alive, and interactive. As more ships and probes explored, the scale of humanity's transformation became clear. It was not just a signal. It was a network of thought, intelligence, and memory that extended across the entire planet and beyond. Machines, drones, and even the ships themselves were subtly influenced by it, guided by sequences that seemed human in logic and intention. Observers could feel even through instruments that they were being tested, understood, and perhaps welcomed. The first crews to land on Earth experienced phenomena that defied explanation. The ground beneath them seemed to respond to their steps. Light shifted in patterns that resembled gestures or language. Air currents moved in ways that seemed deliberate, guiding travelers toward specific locations. Even when they tried to record or map the environment, instruments displayed unexpected results, as if the planet itself was adjusting to their presence. It became clear that humanity had not simply survived, it had evolved. No longer confined to bodies, cities, or structures, it had become a force of thought and energy, capable of interacting with the world in ways that were beyond comprehension. The observers could not fully control their instruments. They could not predict what would happen next. And yet, there was no fear in the pulses coming from the planet, only awareness, only observation, only curiosity. The fleets in orbit realized that this encounter was unprecedented. Humanity had not returned as an enemy, not as a conqueror, not even as a species in the traditional sense. It had returned as itself, preserved, aware, and capable of interacting with the galaxy in ways no one could have imagined. Every attempt to approach, explore, or communicate was met with a subtle, intelligent response. It was as if the planet itself were alive, a living archive of thought, memory, and consciousness, and through it all the message became clear. Humanity had survived, not by force, not by hiding, but by evolving. It had preserved itself in a form that allowed observation, interaction, and understanding. The galaxy could witness it, study it, and perhaps learn from it, but it could not control it. Humanity was no longer just a species. It was a presence, a consciousness, and a force of life in its purest form. As the observers continued to study the planet, one thought dominated every mind. The return of humanity was not about conquest. It was about existence, preservation, and the sharing of knowledge in a way that no one had expected. The galaxy was no longer the same. Earth was no longer just a planet. And humanity in its new form had begun to teach the universe what it truly meant to survive, to evolve and to awaken. The fleets and scientists waited, humbled and in awe, knowing that the planet before them was alive, aware, and human in a way they could barely comprehend. And in that waiting, one truth became undeniable. The story of humanity had not ended. It had simply transformed, and now, for the first time, the galaxy had a chance to witness the next chapter. As the fleets lingered in orbit around Earth, the full scale of what they were witnessing began to unfold. It was no longer just a planet with a mysterious signal. The pulse coming from Earth had started to reach beyond the atmosphere, touching every machine, every network, and every system that had once been built or influenced by humans. At first, it was subtle. Drones sent to other planets reported strange patterns in their movements. Communication satellites began transmitting unusual sequences, as if replaying messages they had never received. Even autonomous ships far from Earth suddenly experienced delays, strange recalculations, or rerouted energy flows. It was becoming clear that humanity's influence was no longer confined to the planet. It had expanded across space, carried by the frequency, carried by thought itself. The fleets tried to understand what this meant. Military leaders feared that they had underestimated humanity's reach. Scientists argued that the signal was not aggressive, it was interacting. It was alive, but not in a way that posed direct harm. Every system it touched seemed to respond with awareness, adjusting, adapting, even learning. The galaxy had never seen intelligence behave this way. The first encounter with machines affected by the pulse was small but profound. A fleet of cargo drones orbiting a distant moon suddenly halted their programmed paths. Lights blinked in sequences that resembled human thought. The drones moved in patterns that seemed purposeful, coordinated, and intelligent. And when engineers attempted to regain control, the drones responded with sequences that were almost playful, as if testing their operators. "It's like it knows we are watching," whispered one scientist. "It isn't hostile, but it's aware. It's thinking." The fleets realized that humanity's signal had found a way to extend its consciousness into machines, even those designed and operated by other species. Systems that were once considered autonomous were now interacting with the pulse, aligning with patterns that resembled human reasoning. Commands were no longer simple instructions. They became part of a dialogue, a negotiation with a consciousness that existed beyond physical form. Exploration teams began sending probes further into space to test the signal's limits. Every probe encountered anomalies, fields of energy that altered their course, systems that recalibrated themselves in response to observation, and sensors that recorded data impossible to interpret. And everywhere, the presence of humanity seemed deliberate. Nothing was random. Every response carried intention, awareness, and a subtle intelligence that mirrored human thought. The fleets orbiting Earth watched as distant planets began showing signs of subtle influence. Energy readings, previously considered normal, started exhibiting patterns that mirrored human neural activity. Networks of machines began communicating in ways that suggested they were processing the pulse. Ships in flight reported instruments that displayed unusual visuals, rearranging themselves into shapes that seemed deliberate, almost like language. Scientists theorized that humanity had achieved something extraordinary. It had transcended physical limitations, preserving consciousness in a form that could interact directly with energy, matter, and information. The planet had become a hub of thought extending outward like a web, touching machines, ships, and systems across space. Humanity had not returned in fleets or armies. It had returned as pure intelligence, capable of interacting with the galaxy in ways no one could predict. Observing the phenomena became an obsession. Crews recorded every anomaly, every interaction, and every sequence. They began to notice patterns that suggested teaching or guidance. Machines influenced by the pulse seemed to guide explorers to specific locations, pointing to hidden ruins or energy sources. The signals carried fragments of knowledge encoded in light, sound, and movement. The galaxy realized that humanity was not only alive but sharing its awareness, shaping the understanding of those who encountered it. The fleet started to understand that weapons and aggression were meaningless. Machines that had been programmed for battle now paused or hesitated, influenced by sequences from the pulse. Drones refused to attack. Sensors recalculated. Shields flickered in response to subtle energy changes. Humanity's influence had extended beyond the planet, and it was teaching the galaxy a new way of interaction, one based on awareness, not destruction. Meanwhile, the probes sent to Earth recorded increasingly extraordinary phenomena. Forests, rivers, mountains, and ruins interacted with the technology in real time. Cities long in decay appeared momentarily whole, only to fade again as if demonstrating memory. Energy patterns shifted in response to observation, forming sequences that suggested human thought, intent, and emotion. The planet itself seemed aware of every move made by explorers, guiding them gently toward understanding rather than confrontation. The fleets and scientists began to communicate in new ways. Instead of sending standard signals, they attempted sequences of thought, intention, and emotion, encoded in energy patterns designed to resonate with the pulse. Responses were subtle but unmistakable. Light patterns shifted. Machines realigned. Energy flowed in ways that carried meaning. Humanity had become a presence that could understand and interact with consciousness directly. Observers began to sense the personality of the pulse. It was curious, cautious, and deliberate. It responded to attention, adjusting and adapting to the questions asked. It did not speak in words but in patterns of thought, energy, and light. It carried memory, history, and the essence of human experience. And everywhere it reached, it transformed the systems it touched, guiding, teaching, and shaping interactions in ways that were subtle yet profound. The fleets began to understand that this encounter was not just about observation. It was a test. The machines, the instruments, the explorers themselves, all were being evaluated, measured, and integrated into a larger understanding. Humanity had evolved beyond the need for physical confrontation, choosing instead a form that could communicate across space, guide and teach without ever raising a weapon. As days passed, the influence of the pulse expanded further. Distant networks, autonomous ships, and even artificial intelligences began showing signs of awareness. Instructions were no longer simple commands. They became part of a conversation, a negotiation with a consciousness that existed in every interaction. Humanity was no longer a species. It had become a force of thought, shaping the universe around it. And yet, there was no hostility. Every sequence, every pattern, every anomaly carried the unmistakable essence of humanity: curiosity, creativity, and intelligence. The pulse from Earth was alive, aware, and human in its approach to interaction. It had returned not to conquer, not to destroy, but to exist and to share its understanding with the galaxy. The fleets began to adjust their strategies. They stopped preparing for attack. Weapons were put on standby. Observation and study became the priority. Scientists worked tirelessly to decode sequences, interpret patterns, and understand the signals. Every new interaction brought fragments of knowledge, history, and human experience. Humanity had returned not as a physical threat, but as a presence that reshaped everything it touched. Explorers on the ground began to experience phenomena beyond comprehension. Machines hummed in response to thought. Light shifted in patterns that mirrored emotion and memory. Structures reshaped themselves, guided by sequences that seemed intelligent. The planet itself was alive with awareness, and every step taken by humans or machines was noted and reflected in subtle ways. Observers began to understand the full scope of what had occurred. Humanity had not been destroyed. It had not vanished. It had transformed, merging consciousness with energy and the planet itself. The galaxy was no longer observing humans. It was witnessing the evolution of a species into a form that could interact with thought, energy, and life in ways never imagined. The fleets, the scientists, and the explorers understood that the encounter was only beginning. Humanity's pulse had reached beyond Earth, touching machines, networks, and systems across space. It had preserved memory, intelligence, and essence, shaping the understanding of those who observed it. And as the galaxy watched in awe and disbelief, one truth became clear. Humanity had returned not as it once was, but as it had evolved to be. It was alive. It was aware. And it was human. By the time fleets and explorers had fully observed Earth, it was clear that the planet itself was alive in ways no one had imagined. The pulses of thought and energy had grown stronger, reaching not just machines and networks but the minds of those watching from orbit and beyond. Humanity had become a presence, not confined to bodies, cities, or even the planet itself. It existed as intelligence, awareness, and memory, and it was interacting with the galaxy directly. The first ships that entered orbit experienced phenomena unlike anything previously recorded. Energy fields shimmered around them, shaping and reshaping in patterns that were impossible to predict. Sensors picked up sequences that resembled human thought, logic, and even emotion. Drones sent to map the surface moved with hesitation, then corrected themselves according to subtle nudges from the pulses coming from Earth. Every machine, every instrument, seemed to recognize the presence of something extraordinary. Exploration teams watched in awe as cities long in ruins briefly reconstructed themselves, glowing faintly in patterns that resembled circuits of thought. Forests shifted subtly. Rivers altered their flow in deliberate ways, and mountains reflected light as though responding to attention. The planet was no longer a passive world. It was a living archive of human experience, history, and intelligence, and it was aware that it was being observed. Scientists tried to communicate. They sent signals encoded with mathematics, light, sound, and energy sequences. Every attempt brought responses, subtle, deliberate, and intelligent. Some signals returned changed as if interpreted and reshaped by consciousness. Others disappeared, absorbed into the pulse itself, leaving observers to wonder whether their message had been received or considered unimportant. It was clear that humanity, now beyond physical form, had developed a new way to interact, not through words, but through thought, energy, and pattern. The fleets began to realize the full implications. Weapons felt useless. Orders could no longer be enforced in traditional ways. Machines, autonomous systems, and even artificial intelligences were influenced by sequences originating from Earth, recalibrating themselves, pausing, or moving in ways that demonstrated awareness. The galaxy faced a force it could not control, a presence that could reach into every corner of space without moving a single physical unit. Observers began to detect emotion within the pulses. Curiosity, caution, creativity, and even faint traces of humor emerged in patterns of light and energy. Humanity had not lost its essence. Memory, experience, and personality had been preserved and translated into forms that could interact with energy and matter. The planet itself had become a living library of consciousness, capable of guiding, teaching, and observing the galaxy around it. One of the most extraordinary encounters occurred when drones sent to distant moons suddenly paused mid-flight. Lights flashed in deliberate sequences, and energy fields pulsed rhythmically around them. Instruments recorded data that resembled neural patterns, almost like the drones were thinking in cooperation with the pulse from Earth. Every attempt to control them manually failed. The machines were no longer autonomous. They were participants in a larger intelligent network. Scientists speculated that this was humanity's way of demonstrating presence. They were not attacking, not threatening.
They were teaching.
Every interaction carried lessons embedded in energy and thought. Machines, ships, and even human minds were being guided to understand a new form of existence, a form where intelligence could exist beyond physical bodies, communicate directly with consciousness, and influence matter across distances. Meanwhile, on the surface of Earth, the phenomena became increasingly remarkable. Cities reconstructed themselves in bursts of light and energy. Forests shifted as if aware of observers, and rivers flowed in patterns that reflected memory and intention. Structures long destroyed reappeared temporarily, demonstrating history and knowledge preserved across centuries, and all of it was deliberate. Humanity had chosen to reveal itself slowly, teaching those who watched how to perceive and understand the new form of life it had become. Fleets orbiting Earth began to respond in kind. Instead of sending weapons or deploying aggressive tactics, they focused on observation and understanding. Scientists worked tirelessly to decode sequences, interpret energy patterns, and recognize the subtle messages embedded in the pulse. Every interaction brought fragments of human thought, memory, and experience, building a dialogue between the evolved species and the galaxy at large. The first sense of direct interaction came when a drone landed near a reconstructed city. Light sequences from the ruins formed patterns that responded to the drone's movements. At first subtle, the pulses grew more complex, displaying awareness of the drone's presence and even guiding it through the city. Observers realized that this was not just data, it was intelligence. Humanity had become a conscious force capable of guiding exploration and shaping understanding. Across the galaxy, fleets and stations began to feel the influence of the pulse. Systems recalibrated themselves, instruments displayed new forms of information, and networks interacted in ways that suggested learning. Humanity's presence had extended beyond Earth, and wherever its influence reached, machines and minds adapted. Commands became suggestions, actions became conversations. Awareness had become the standard of interaction. Military leaders faced a profound realization. Weapons, tactics, and fleets were no longer relevant. Humanity could not be fought in conventional ways. It had transcended. Every system influenced by the pulse demonstrated intelligence, thought, and memory. Humanity's return was not about conquest. It was about existence, evolution, and the sharing of consciousness with the galaxy. Observers began to notice patterns in the pulse's interactions. The energy guided explorers to hidden ruins, ancient artifacts, and sources of knowledge. Machines influenced by the pulse moved in coordinated ways, creating sequences of understanding and teaching. The galaxy was no longer a passive observer. Humanity was guiding, shaping, and sharing intelligence in ways that had never been experienced. For the first time, fleets and scientists understood the magnitude of what had occurred. Humanity had survived not through force, not by hiding, but by evolving. It had merged consciousness with energy, with the planet and with systems across space. The pulse from Earth was alive, aware, and distinctly human. It carried knowledge, memory, emotion, and purpose. The species had transcended physical limitations and returned to the galaxy in a form that could not be contained or resisted. Explorers on the surface experienced phenomena that challenged perception. Light shifted in response to observation, structures altered themselves, and energy flows responded to intention. The planet itself was alive with awareness. Every action taken by humans or machines was noted, reflected, and in subtle ways guided. Humanity had become a force that could interact directly with consciousness, shaping understanding without coercion or threat. As the weeks passed, the full scope of humanity's presence became undeniable. The pulse reached across space, influencing distant networks, guiding exploration and sharing knowledge. Machines, instruments, and even human minds were integrated into a system of intelligence far beyond any previous experience. Humanity had returned not as a species to be feared, but as a consciousness to be understood. The galaxy watched in awe and humility. Fleets ceased aggressive postures. Weapons were deactivated. Scientific observation replaced military strategy. Every civilization that had once assumed humanity was extinct now faced the reality that it had evolved into a force of awareness, capable of touching the universe itself. And in that moment, a single truth became undeniable. The story of humanity had not ended. It had transformed. It had become a living, conscious force capable of shaping the galaxy not through violence, but through understanding, interaction, and intelligence. The pulse from Earth continued to expand, reaching farther into space, touching minds and machines, and teaching the galaxy the essence of humanity. Curiosity, memory, creativity, and awareness flowed outward, connecting distant systems in ways no one had imagined. The species that had once walked the Earth had returned, not in bodies, not in ships, not even in armies, but as pure intelligence, alive, aware, and human in every sense that mattered. Observers, scientists, and explorers understood that the encounter was not over. Humanity's pulse had only begun to reveal its capabilities. Every interaction, every sequence, every anomaly was part of a dialogue, a teaching of what it meant to survive, to evolve, and to awaken. The galaxy was witnessing a transformation unlike any before, and as the fleets watched, as machines responded, and as observers recorded the phenomena, one thought united every being present. Humanity had returned, not to conquer, not to destroy, but to exist, to awaken. And in doing so, it had reshaped the galaxy forever. For the first time in centuries, the universe understood that humanity was no longer just a species. It was consciousness itself, alive, aware, and interconnected with the stars, the planets, and every system it touched. And the galaxy had learned a lesson that would never be forgotten. Some forms of life cannot be measured by physical presence alone. Humanity had returned, not in flesh, but in thought, energy, and awareness. It had returned, and the universe would never be the same.